"He's my son, but not my queen's," said the Vampire King as he handed the baby to the young village woman. Rain lashed the borderlands of Valor in violent sheets, turning the mist-shrouded roads into rivers of mud and memory. The village of Hollow's Edge lay dark and shuddered against the storm, every window latched, every door barred, except one. At the cottage farthest from the village square, a single candle flickered behind rain-streaked glass. The rhythmic thunder of hooves cut through the downpour, growing louder, closer, impossibly deliberate. A black carriage emerged from the fog, its lanterns blazing like demon eyes, wheels churning through the flooded road until it shuddered to a halt before the humble stone cottage. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. The door creaked open. A young woman stepped into the storm, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders, her lantern swaying in trembling hands. "Who rides at this hour?" she called, her voice barely rising above the wind. It wavered, half fear, half something closer to pity. The carriage door swung wide. A figure descended, tall and otherworldly, his cloak streaming with rainwater, his boots sinking into the muck with unnatural silence. Against his chest, he cradled something small, something crying. The lantern's glow caught his face, pale as death, sharp as carved marble, eyes glowing faintly with crimson light. "Forgive this intrusion," he said, his voice low and steady despite the chaos around them. "You are Bryn Marlowe." Bryn froze. "Ah, yes, my lord. But how do you know my name?" "I was told you possess a brave heart," he said, stepping closer. The infant's cry pierced the storm. "I pray tonight that such tales are true." She lowered the lantern, and her breath caught. The bundle in his arms shifted. A newborn, tiny fists flailing against the cold. "A baby," Bryn gasped. "My lord, you cannot travel with a child in such a storm. He'll catch his death." The man moved closer still, until she could see the rain streaming down his inhuman features, until she could see the anguish carved into his immortal face. "He is my son," he said quietly, as though confessing to the tempest itself. Then, after a pause that seemed to silence even the thunder, he added, "But not my queen's." Bryn's heart stopped. She stared at him, at the raw desperation bleeding through his regal composure, at the way he held the child as though it were the last precious thing in a dying world. "You mean," she began. "There is no time for questions," he interrupted, his voice sharpening. "Hunters are already on his trail. They must not find him. You must keep him hidden, safe, please." She looked at the baby's face, so impossibly small, so fragile it seemed he might dissolve like mist. "But my lord, I'm only a village woman. I have nothing. What you ask." "Gold means nothing," he said, his crimson eyes burning into hers. "What matters is silence. If anyone asks, he was abandoned at your door. You found him. You understand." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the crest emblazoned on the carriage door, a serpent coiled around a crescent moon, the symbol of House Valor. Bryn's knees nearly buckled. You are Lord Eric Valor," she whispered. "The Vampire King." He closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. "Then you know what it means if the queen discovers him." "And his mother?" Bryn dared to ask, her voice trembling. Eric's expression darkened. "She is gone, taken by those who believed they were preserving the realm's purity." Something shifted inside Bryn then, something ancient and maternal, tender and fierce all at once. She reached out with both hands. He placed the baby into her arms. The child's tiny fingers brushed her cheek, and warmth flooded through her, stronger than fear, deeper than doubt. "You will never speak my name," Eric said, his tone final as death. "Not to the priest. Not to your neighbors. Not even to the boy when he grows. Swear it." "I swear," Bryn whispered, her voice breaking. He looked at her then, truly looked, as though memorizing every line of her face, every flicker of candlelight in her eyes. "One day, he may come to know the truth, but let it be when his heart is strong enough to bear it. Not when the world still judges bloodlines more harshly than love." Thunder rolled again, shaking the ground beneath them. Eric turned toward the carriage. "May the old gods watch over you," Bryn Marlowe. Wait, she called after him, clutching the baby tighter. At least tell me, what is his name? He paused at the carriage door, his silver hair plastered against his skull, his back to her. His name, he said softly, is Elias. Then he vanished into the mist, and the carriage rolled away into the storm as though it had never been. Bryn stood there, rain pouring over her face, soaking through her shawl, dripping from her chin. The baby stirred in her arms, his cries fading into soft, shuddering breaths. She carried him inside, shutting the door against the wind. The single candle still burned on the table. She wrapped him in a worn wool blanket and knelt by the dying fire, cradling him close. Elias, she whispered, testing the name like a fragile spell. What have they done to you, little one? He opened his eyes, dark, impossibly calm, watchful beyond his hours. A strange peace settled over her. She could not explain it, but she felt as though the child had chosen her, not the other way around, as though fate itself had led the vampire king to her door. She dried his tiny hands, humming a lullaby her mother once sang to her in a voice long silenced. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving only the steady drip of rain from the eaves. By dawn, the cottage smelled of warm milk and ash. Bryn sat in the chair by the hearth, Elias asleep against her shoulder. She had not slept at all. Her mind raced with questions she could never ask, with secrets she could never share. A knock rattled the window. Old Marta from the neighboring farm peered through the glass, squinting against the morning light. A knock rattled the window. Old Marta from the neighboring farm peered through the glass, squinting against the morning light. Bryn's heart lurched. She pulled the blanket higher over Elias's face and rose slowly, forcing her expression into something calm. "Morning, Marta," she called through the door, not opening it. "Though I heard a baby crying last night," Marta said, her voice sharp with curiosity. "Through all that storm, you all right in there, girl?" "Just the wind playing tricks," Bryn replied, her throat tight. "You know how it howls through the eaves." Marta lingered a moment longer, then shuffled away muttering about young women and their secrets. Bryn exhaled and locked the door. She looked down at Elias, still sleeping against her shoulder, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. She had no idea how to care for an infant. No milk, no cradle, no experience. But as the dawn light filtered through the shutters, she found herself moving on instinct, warming water over the coals, tearing strips of soft cloth for swaddling, humming melodies she didn't remember learning. "Elias," she whispered again, letting the name settle into her heart. "That's who you are, Elias." The baby stirred, his dark eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw something flicker in their depths, something ancient and aware. But then he yawned, and the moment passed. The memory came unbidden as she rocked him by the fire. 3 years earlier, Bryn had been returning from the northern market, her basket heavy with grain, when the sun dipped below the ridge too quickly. Shadows pooled between the trees. The road grew dark, cold. Then she heard them, low growls, scraping claws, the wet sound of breath that shouldn't belong to anything living. Night beasts. She ran, basket forgotten, her lungs burning. They were faster. Always faster. One leaped, jaws snapping inches from her neck. And then light exploded through the forest. A woman stepped from nowhere, her silver eyes blazing, her hands wreathed in golden flame. She moved like water and lightning combined, cutting through the beasts with magic Bryn had only heard about in fireside tales. Within moments, the creatures were ash. The woman turned to Bryn, her breath steady, her expression calm. "Are you hurt?" Bryn shook her head, trembling too hard to speak. "Good." The woman knelt, brushing dirt from Bryn's torn sleeve. "You have a brave heart. I can see it." She smiled, sad, knowing, distant. "Remember that when the time comes." "Who are you?" Bryn managed, but the woman was already fading into the mist, her silver eyes the last thing to disappear. Bryn never learned her name, never saw her again, until now. Because as she looked at Elias, at the shape of his small nose, the curve of his brow, she saw echoes of that woman's face in his. Eloan, the name Eric never spoke. The mother who died so this child could live. 1 week has passed. Bryn kept Elias hidden as best she could, but villages were small, and secrets had short lives. Neighbors began whispering. Where did the baby come from? Why wouldn't Bryn say? Was she hiding shame?
Scandal?
Whose child is that? Father Greaves asked when he saw her at the well, Elias bundled tightly against her chest. An orphan, Bryn lied, her voice steady. Left at my door during the storm. The priest's eyes narrowed. Strange that no one heard of a pregnant woman traveling through. Strange times, Bryn replied, and walked away before he could press further. But the questions didn't stop, and neither did the strangeness surrounding Elias. It started small. A gust of wind inside the cottage, though every window was shut. Shadows that moved wrong, curling toward the baby's cradle like living things. Once, when Elias cried, the candle flames bent toward him, flickering in rhythm with his breath. Bryn's blood ran cold. She began keeping him swaddled tighter. The shutters closed even during the day. She sang constantly, hoping the sound would mask any odd occurrences. But she could feel it growing, the magic in his blood, waking slowly, dangerously. If anyone saw, they would know he wasn't ordinary. And if they knew that, they would start asking questions she couldn't answer. Far to the north, in the blackened halls of Valor Castle, Commander Thorne knelt before the Queen's throne. The child lives, the Queen said, her voice cold as a winter stone. My husband believes I don't know. How quaint. Thorne's jaw tightened. We will find him, Your Majesty. Beside him, Shadow Seer Lyra stepped forward, her eyes like smoke given form. I have already traced the threads of his magic, faint but present. The boy is young, untrained. He will leave marks. The Queen leaned forward, her pale fingers drumming against the armrest. Eloan Crestfall thought she could hide her bloodline by bearing a child in secret. Foolish woman. The Almerian line ends with this boy. Do you understand? Completely, Thorne said. Find him.
Kill him.
And if anyone has sheltered him, the Queen's smile was a knife. Bring me their name. 2 days later, Lyra stood at the edge of Hollow's Edge, her cloak billowing in the wind. She closed her eyes, reaching into the shadows cast by the trees, the stones, the rooftops. There, she whispered. Faint, but there. Thorne mounted his horse, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. How far? Close, Lyra said, her smile thin and predatory. Very close. That night, Bryn woke to the sound of nothing. No crickets. No wind. Just silence. She rose from her bed and moved to the window, peering through the slats. The forest beyond her cottage was dark, too dark. The moonlight seemed to stop at the tree line, swallowed by something unseen. Elias stirred in his cradle, whimpering softly. Bryn's heart hammered. She crossed the room and lifted him into her arms, holding him close. Shuh, little one. Shuh. But her eyes stayed fixed on the window, on the shadows between the trees, on the feeling cold and certain that something was watching and waiting. The shadows between the trees never moved, but Bryn felt them watching all the same. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the fire with Elias in her arms, a kitchen knife within reach, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the shutters. By dawn, the oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by birdsong and the ordinary sounds of morning. But the feeling didn't leave. Something had been there. Something had seen them. In the grand hall of Valor Castle, Lord Eric Valor stood before his council, his crimson eyes cold as winter's first frost. I want reports, he said, his voice cutting through the chamber. Every patrol, every village, every whisper along the borderlands. The council members exchanged careful glances. Lord Bastian, the eldest, cleared his throat. My lord, the patrols report nothing unusual. The realm is quiet. Quiet, Eric repeated, his tone sharp as a blade. And yet, I hear rumors of hunters moving through the southern woods. Commander Thorne's name is mentioned in taverns. Tell me, Bastian, why would the Queen's hound be hunting in my territories without my knowledge? Bastian's expression remained smooth. Perhaps routine investigation, my lord. Border security. Eric's jaw tightened. He could smell the lie, taste it in the air like ash. But these men, his council, his supposed advisors, had already chosen their allegiance. Not to him, to her, to the Queen who sat in her tower, spinning webs of fear and control. Leave me, Eric said quietly. They bowed and filed out, their relief palpable. When the doors closed, Eric turned to the window overlooking the kingdom shrouded in mist. His hands curled into fists. Eloan. Her name still burned in his chest like an old wound that refused to heal. She had been everything the queen was not: warm, alive, radiant with a magic that sang in harmony with the land itself. Heir to the Almerian wardens, the last line of a bloodline thought extinct, bearers of magic older than the vampire courts. The queen had discovered their affair, had learned of the child, and she acted swiftly. Eric closed his eyes, remembering Eloan's final words, her hand trembling in his as the poison worked through her veins. Protect him. Promise me. Let him live where I could not. He had promised, but the cost was greater than he'd imagined. The queen feared the prophecy whispered in old texts that a child born of magic and immortal blood would bridge the dying realms, unite what had been sundered for centuries. She saw only threat, only the erosion of her power. And so the boy had to die. Eric's choice was impossible. Return to his son and shatter the fragile peace holding his kingdom together, or stay, play the obedient king, and trust a mortal woman to protect what he could not. He hated both options equally, but he had made his choice the night he left Elias in Bryn's arms. Now he could only watch.
And wait.
Bryn had stopped going to the village market. It was too risky. Too many eyes. Too many questions. Instead, she bartered with passing traders at her door, speaking quickly, keeping Elias hidden in the back room. She told them she was caring for a sick relative, that she couldn't be disturbed. Most believed her. Some didn't, but she no longer cared what they thought. Because somewhere between the sleepless nights and the soft weight of Elias in her arms, something had shifted. He wasn't just a child she was protecting. He was hers. She memorized the way his tiny fingers curled around her thumb, the way he smiled, rare, fleeting when she sang, the way his eyes followed her across the room as though she were his entire world. "You're mine now," she whispered one evening as she rocked him to sleep. "No matter what they say. No matter who comes. You're mine." Elias's eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out. Bryn kissed his forehead and laid him gently in the cradle. The next morning she found them, footprints in the mud outside her cottage.
Large. Deep.
But wrong. The toes were too long. The spacing is unnatural. And where the heel should have pressed deepest, there were only claw marks gouging the earth. Bryn's stomach turned. She crouched low, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, but the prints led from the forest directly to her window, and then back again. Something had stood there, watching. She grabbed a bucket and washed the prints away, her hand shaking. That night, Eric Vaylor stood in those same woods, hidden by shadow and silence. He had traveled under cover of darkness, moving faster than any mortal eye could follow, until he reached the edge of Hollow's Edge. Her cottage was small, humble. A single candle burned in the window. Through the gap in the shutters, he saw her. Bryn, rocking his son in her arms, her voice soft as she sang a lullaby. Eric's chest tightened. Elias looked healthy.
Safe. Loved.
For a moment, he considered stepping forward, knocking on the door, holding his son, just once more. But he couldn't. If he revealed himself, the queen would know. Her spies were everywhere. And the moment she confirmed the boy's location, no power in the realm could stop her wrath. So Eric stayed in the shadows, watching until the candle went dark, until Bryn's breathing slowed into sleep. "Stay strong," he whispered into the night. "Both of you." Then he vanished into the mist. 2 days later, Commander Thorne arrived in Hollow's Edge. He moved through the village like a wolf among sheep, calm, deliberate, patient. He stopped at the tavern first, buying ale for the locals, listening to their gossip. Then the blacksmith, the miller, the priest. "I seek a woman," he said, his tone pleasant. "She may have taken in a child recently. An orphan, perhaps. Or a foundling." Father Greaves hesitated. "There is Bryn Marlowe. She lives at the edge of the village. Claims she found a babe during the storm." Thorne's smile was cold. How generous of her. He moved closer to her street, knocked on neighboring doors, asked careful, probing questions, and with each answer, the net tightened. Bryn saw him from her window. A tall man in dark leather, his movements too controlled, too purposeful. He stopped at Marta's door, spoke briefly. Marta pointed toward Bryn's cottage. Panic surged through her. She grabbed Elias, wrapped him tightly, and moved to the back of the cottage where a loose board led to a small root cellar. She'd prepared it days ago. Blankets, water, bread. Not a sound, little one, she whispered, her voice trembling.
Please.
Not a sound. Elias looked up at her with those impossibly calm eyes, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw understanding there. A knock echoed through the cottage. Bryn closed the cellar door and straightened, forcing her hands to stop shaking. She opened the front door. Thorne stood before her, his expression polite.
Deadly.
Good evening, he said. I wonder if I might ask you a few questions. Good evening, Thorne said, his smile sharp as broken glass. I wonder if I might ask you a few questions. Bryn's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face calm. Of course, sir. Though I don't know what help I can offer. Thorne's eyes swept past her into the cottage, taking in the humble furniture, the dying fire, the cradle in the corner. Empty. I'm searching for a child, he said, his tone pleasant. An infant. Perhaps you've heard rumors? A foundling, they say. Taken in during the storm some weeks back. There are always rumors in villages, Bryn replied carefully. People talk. Indeed they do. Thorne stepped closer, his shadow falling across the threshold. And yet, Father Greaves mentioned your name specifically. Said you claimed to have found a babe. Is that true? Bryn forced herself to meet his gaze. It is. But the child died 3 days after I took him in.
Fever.
I buried him behind the cottage. The lie tasted like ash on her tongue. Thorne studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. My condolences. May I see the grave? If you wish. She led him to the small plot she'd prepared weeks ago, a mound of earth marked with a crude wooden cross. She'd known this moment might come, known she would need proof. Thorne crouched beside it, running his fingers over the disturbed soil. Fresh, he murmured. As I said, 3 days. He rose, brushing dirt from his hands, his eyes never leaving hers. You have my sympathy, Miss Marlowe. Losing a child is a terrible thing. Yes, Bryn whispered. It is. Thorne tipped his head and walked away, but Bryn saw the doubt lingering in his expression. He didn't believe her. Not entirely. She waited until he disappeared down the road before returning inside, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. In the root cellar, Elias was silent, waiting. 2 years later, the market square bustled with morning trade, farmers selling grain, women haggling over fabric, children darting between stalls. Bryn kept Elias close, his small hand gripped tight in hers. He was nearly 3 now, with dark curls and eyes too knowing for his age. Stay beside me, she whispered. But Elias was distracted, watching a merchant stack apples into a precarious pyramid. The fruit gleamed in the sunlight, red and perfect. Pretty, Elias said, reaching toward them. Don't touch. A gust of wind tore through the square. It came from nowhere, sudden, violent, unnatural. The apple pyramid exploded outward, fruit tumbling across cobblestones. The merchant's awning ripped free, canvas snapping like a sail in a storm. Nearby stalls shuddered, goods clattering to the ground. And at the center of it all stood Elias, his hand still outstretched, his eyes wide with surprise. The wind died as quickly as it came. Silence fell over the market. Then the whispers began. Did you see? The boy. Witchcraft. Cursed. Ill omen. Bryn scooped Elias into her arms and ran, her heart pounding in her throat. She didn't stop until they were back at the cottage, the door barred, the shutters closed. What happened? Elias asked, his voice small. Did I do something bad? No, sweetheart. Bryn's hands trembled as she set him down. You have to be more careful. You have to keep it hidden. Keep what hidden? The magic inside you. Elias looked at his hands, confused. I don't understand. Bryn knelt before him, gripping his shoulders gently. I know, but you have to trust me, please. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mama. The word cracked something open in Bryn's chest. He'd never called her that before. It's all right, she whispered, pulling him close. It's all right, but it wasn't, because she knew what would happen next. By midday, Commander Thorne had returned to Hollow's Edge. He'd been tracking leads through neighboring villages when word reached him, a strange wind in the market square. A boy with unnatural power. Villagers frightened, speaking of curses and dark magic. Where? Thorne demanded. The Marlowe woman, a farmer said, his voice shaking. The one who claimed the foundling died. But we've seen her with a boy.
Young.
Strange eyes. Thorne's expression hardened. Show me. At the edge of the square, Shadow Seer Lyra emerged from the shadows, her cloak rippling like smoke. She pressed her palm to the cobblestones where Elias had stood, her eyes closing. Almerian blood, she whispered. Faint, but unmistakable, mixed with something darker. Older. Thorne's hand moved to his sword. The child lives. More than lives, Lyra said, her smile cold. He's awakening. That night, Bryn packed what little they had, clothes, food, a few coins hidden beneath the floorboards. She couldn't stay. Not anymore. The village had turned against her. The hunters were closing in. Mama? Elias stood in the doorway, clutching a wooden horse Bryn had carved for him. Are we leaving? Yes, sweetheart. Where are we going? Bryn didn't know. Somewhere far. Somewhere hidden. Somewhere safe. Elias climbed into bed, his eyes heavy with sleep. Mama? I had a dream last night. What kind of dream? About a man. He had silver hair. And red eyes. Like fire. Elias tilted his head. He said he was my father. Bryn's breath caught. What else did he say? That he's watching. That he won't let them hurt me. Elias yawned. Is it true? Is he my father? Bryn's heart twisted. She wanted to tell him the truth. Wanted to explain who he really was. A prince, an heir, a child born of forbidden love and ancient magic. But the words wouldn't come. Sleep now, she whispered instead. We'll talk in the morning. Elias's eyes drifted closed. Bryn sat beside him, her hand resting on his small shoulder, and wondered how much longer she could keep him safe with lies. Outside, hidden in the mist-shrouded woods, Commander Thorne watched the cottage. Beside him, Lyra knelt in the underbrush, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. Shadows curled around her like living things, drawn to the power radiating from within the cottage walls. He's there, she murmured.
The boy.
I can feel his magic bleeding through the stones. Thorne's jaw tightened. Then why wait? Because he's not alone. Lyra's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Something else watches this place. Something old. As if in answer, the shadows around the cottage shifted, twisting, coiling, forming shapes that shouldn't exist. Lyra hissed, pulling her hand back. What was that? Thorne demanded. The boy's power, Lyra whispered, her voice edged with something close to fear. It's unstable.
Wild.
If we move too quickly, he could lash out. Destroy everything within a mile. Thorne's hand remained on his sword. Then we wait. Watch. And when the moment comes, we strike, Lyra finished. In the cottage, Elias stirred in his sleep, and the shadows danced. In the cottage, Elias stirred in his sleep, and the shadows danced. Bryn didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the tree line, waiting for movement that never came. But she felt them out there, the hunters, circling like wolves scenting blood. Dawn broke gray and cold. By mid-morning they came. The knock wasn't gentle. It rattled the door in its frame, urgent and demanding. Bryn rose, positioning herself between the door and Elias, who sat by the fire playing with his wooden horse. Open up, Bryn Marlowe. Father Greaves's voice. But he wasn't alone. Through the window, Bryn saw half the village gathered outside. Farmers, merchants, neighbors she'd known for years. Their faces were hard, frightened. She opened the door a crack. Father. Where did this child come from? Greaves demanded, his jaw tight. The truth, Bryn. No more lies. Behind him, Marta pointed a trembling finger. She said he died. But we've all seen him. The boy with the devil's eyes. The one who summoned storms. I told you. You told us nothing but falsehoods. The blacksmith pushed forward, his face red with anger. My daughter saw what he did in the market. Unnatural. Cursed. He's just a child, Bryn said, her voice shaking. He doesn't understand what he is. Then tell us what he is. Greaves stepped closer. Whose son is he? What manner of creature have you brought into our village? Bryn's silence was answer enough. Commander Thorn emerged from the crowd, his expression grave. I can answer that, father. The boy is stolen property. A noble child, taken from his rightful family. This woman has harbored him for her own purposes, perhaps ransom, perhaps something darker. That's a lie. Bryn's voice cracked. Is it? Thorn's eyes glinted. Then tell them the truth. Tell them who gave you this child. Tell them why you've hidden him for 3 years. Bryn's mouth opened, but no words came. She couldn't. The promise she'd made to Eric, never speak his name, never reveal the truth, bound her as surely as iron chains. She won't answer because she can't, Thorn said, turning to the crowd. This boy is dangerous. His magic is wild, untrained. How long before he hurts someone? How long before he destroys your homes, your families? The villagers murmured, their fear ripening into something uglier. Give us the boy, Greaves said quietly. We'll take him to the magistrate. Let proper authorities decide his fate.
No.
Bryn stepped back, her hand finding Elias's shoulder. You'll have to kill me first. So be it, someone shouted. The crowd surged forward. Bryn slammed the door and bolted it. She grabbed Elias, throwing what little she'd packed into a satchel. We're leaving. Now. Mama, I'm scared. I know, sweetheart. But you have to be brave. She kicked open the back door and ran. Night had fallen by the time they reached the forest, but the pursuit never stopped. Torches bobbed through the trees behind them, voices calling out, demanding she surrender. Bryn's lungs burned. Elias clung to her back, his small arms wrapped tight around her neck. Keep running, she gasped. Don't look back. But the forest itself seemed to turn against her. Paths twisted where they shouldn't. Trees loomed too close, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Bryn stumbled over roots that hadn't been there moments before. Illusions. Lyra's magic, weaving confusion through the darkness. There. Thorn's voice, too close, cut her off at the ridge. Bryn veered left, scrambling up a steep embankment. Her boots slipped on loose stone. She grabbed for a handhold, but the rock crumbled beneath her fingers. She fell backward, the ground rushing up to meet her. And then the wind exploded around them. Elias screamed, his small hands glowing with pale light, and the air itself seemed to solidify beneath them. They hung suspended for a heartbeat before landing hard on a ledge 10 feet below. Bryn gasped for breath, staring at her son. Elias. I didn't mean to. Tears streamed down his face. I just didn't want you to fall. It's all right. She pulled him close, her heart hammering. You saved us. But their reprieve was brief. Above them, torches appeared at the ridge's edge. Down there, someone shouted. Bryn ran again, following a narrow path that skirted the cliff face. The forest grew denser, older, the trees twisted with age. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Then she heard them, growls, low and guttural, echoing through the darkness. Night beasts. Their glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, circling, cutting off her escape. Bryn pressed Elias behind her, gripping a broken branch, like a weapon. It was pathetic, useless. The beasts lunged, and died mid-leap. One moment they were there, snarling and savage. The next, they were nothing but ash scattering on the wind. Bryn spun, searching the darkness. Who's there? No answer. But she felt him, a presence in the shadows, familiar and cold. Eric, she whispered. A low voice drifted through the trees. Keep moving.
North.
Toward Crestfall. Why there? Because she would have wanted it.
Go.
Now. The presence vanished, leaving only silence and the fading scent of rain. Bryn didn't question it. She gathered Elias and ran north, following instinct and half-remembered directions from years ago. The forest opened into rolling hills, and beyond them, the dark silhouette of ancient ruins rose against the night sky. Crestfall Keep. Eloan's ancestral home. We'll be safe there, Bryn murmured, more to herself than Elias. We have to be. At the ridge, Commander Thorn stared into the darkness, where Bryn had vanished. She's heading north, Lyra said, her eyes glowing faintly, toward the old Crestfall lands. Thorn's jaw tightened. Of course she is. You knew she would? A woman with a brave heart, protecting a child born of noble blood? Thorn's smile was cold. Where else would she go but to the place where his mother once lived? Sentiment. It makes people predictable. Lyra traced a pattern in the air, shadows coiling around her fingers. The ruins are protected by old magic, Elmirian wards. If the boy reaches them, he won't. Thorn turned to his men. We move at first light. And this time we end it. Behind them, the villagers had stopped their pursuit, their torches retreating toward home. But Thorn and Lyra pressed on, relentless as death itself. In the shadows, unseen, Eric Vaylor watched them go. His hands were still stained with the ash of the night beasts he'd killed, his crimson eyes fixed on the path his son had taken. "Forgive me," he whispered into the wind. "Forgive me for leaving you to fight this alone." But he couldn't follow. Not yet. Not while the Queen's eyes remained on him, watching for any sign of betrayal. All he could do was clear the path, and pray Bryn's brave heart would be enough. He vanished into the mist, a ghost protecting what he could no longer claim. He vanished into the mist, a ghost protecting what he could no longer claim. Dawn broke over Crestfall Woods, with an unsettling stillness. Bryn and Elias had walked through the night, stumbling over roots and stones, following the crumbling remnants of an ancient road. By first light, the ruins of Crestfall Keep rose before them, a skeleton of broken towers and fallen walls, wrapped in ivy and morning fog. "It's beautiful," Elias whispered, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Bryn stared at the ruins, feeling something stir in her chest. Recognition, though she'd never been here before. "Your mother was born here," she said softly. "This was her home." "My real mother?" Bryn nodded, kneeling beside him. "Her name was Aloan. She was brave and kind, and she loved you more than anything in this world." Elias's eyes filled with questions, but before he could speak, Bryn pressed a finger to his lips. "Later. I promise. Right now, we need to find shelter." They picked their way through the ruins, searching for a place to hide. The keep's main hall had collapsed, but a tower at the eastern edge still stood, its stone stairs intact. Bryn climbed first, testing each step, then pulled Elias up behind her. The chamber at the top was small but dry, with narrow windows overlooking the forest. Ancient tapestries hung in tatters on the walls, their colors faded, but still showing glimpses of silver-eyed figures wreathed in light. The Elmirian wardens. Aloan's bloodline. "We'll rest here," Bryn said, setting down their meager supplies. "Just for a few hours." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of eyes upon them. They were not alone. Commander Thorn moved through Crestfall Woods like a predator who knew every shadow, every path. He'd hunted these lands before, years ago, when the last of the Elmirian line was being purged. He knew the ruins, knew their secrets, and he knew exactly where a desperate woman would run. "Here," he said, pointing to a narrow gap between two moss-covered stones. "Set the snares low. She'll be carrying the boy. She won't see them." His men worked quickly, laying wire traps across likely paths, positioning themselves in the underbrush. By the time the sun climbed higher, the ruins were surrounded. Nearby, Shadow Seer Lyra stood with her eyes closed, her hands spread wide. Tendrils of shadow stretched from her fingertips, weaving through the forest like smoke, searching, tasting the air. "There," she whispered. "East Tower. His magic burns like a beacon." Thorn's smile was cold. "Then let's collect what belongs to the Queen." Inside the tower, Elias had fallen asleep against Bryn's shoulder. She held him close, listening to his soft breathing, memorizing the warmth of him. "I can't keep him safe forever," she thought, "but I can keep him safe today." A sound outside, stones scraping against stone. Bryn's eyes snapped open. She set Elias down gently and moved to the window, peering through the narrow gap. Movement in the ruins below. Figures in dark leather, spreading through the courtyard. Her blood turned to ice. "Elias." She shook him awake. "We have to go."
Now.
But when she turned toward the stairs, Thorn was already there. He stood in the doorway, sword drawn, his expression calm. "End of the road, Miss Marlowe." Bryn grabbed the broken chair leg she'd found earlier and swung it like a club. Thorn blocked it effortlessly, kicking her backward. She crashed against the wall, gasping. "Mama!" Elias screamed. He thrust out his hands, and wind howled through the chamber. Thorn staggered, raising an arm to shield his face, but he didn't fall. Impressive, Thorn said, but untrained. Shadows erupted from the doorway as Lyra glided into the room, her eyes glowing like embers. Stand down, child. You cannot win this. Leave us alone. Elias's voice cracked with desperation, and the shadows around him began to writhe, responding to his fear, his anger. But Lyra was faster. She gestured sharply, and tendrils of solid darkness shot forward, wrapping around Bryn's arms, her legs, her throat. Bryn choked, struggling against the tightening grip, her vision blurring. No! Elias lunged toward her, but Thorn caught him by the back of his shirt, lifting him off the ground. Got you. Let me go. Let her go. Elias thrashed, his magic flaring wildly, wind and light and shadow exploding outward in chaotic bursts. Thorn grunted, holding firm. Lyra, restrain him. Lyra murmured an incantation, and the shadows around Elias solidified into chains, binding his wrists, his ankles. His magic sputtered and died, smothered beneath her dark sorcery. Elias! Bryn screamed, tears streaming down her face. Elias, no. Thorn slung the boy over his shoulder. The queen will be pleased. Please, Bryn gasped, the shadow tendrils crushing the breath from her lungs. Please don't hurt him. He's just a child. He's an abomination, Lyra said coldly. She turned to Thorn. Kill the woman. Loose ends. Thorn drew a dagger from his belt and approached Bryn, his expression almost apologetic. You shouldn't have taken him in. Should have let him die in the storm. Bryn closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she didn't believe in. The blade descended, and the world exploded. Thunder cracked like the breaking of worlds. The tower shuddered, stones groaning, dust cascading from the ceiling. The air itself seemed to tear apart, and through the rift stepped a figure wreathed in storm and fury. Lord Eric Vaylor. His eyes burned crimson, his pale hair whipping around him in an unnatural wind. Power radiated from him, ancient, terrible, unstoppable. Touch her again, Eric said, his voice low and deadly, and I will unmake you from existence. Thorn stumbled backward, nearly dropping Elias. My lord. Silence. Eric moved faster than sight, his hand closing around Thorn's throat, lifting him off the ground. Elias tumbled free, rolling across the floor. You dare hunt my son? Eric's grip tightened. You dare threaten those under my protection? Thorn's face turned purple, his hands clawing uselessly at Eric's wrist. Lyra stepped forward, shadows coiling around her. The queen commands. The queen, Eric snarled, commands nothing here. He flung Thorn aside like a rag doll. The commander crashed through the doorway, tumbling down the stairs with a sickening series of thuds. Lyra unleashed her magic, shadow blades, dark lightning, curses that would age a mortal to dust in seconds. Eric walked through them all as though they were mist. He seized Lyra by the face, his fingers digging into her skull. You will tell her this. My son lives. And anyone who seeks to harm him will meet the same fate as you. You wouldn't, Lyra gasped. Watch me. Light erupted from Eric's hand, not the crimson of vampire magic, but something older, borrowed from the blood he'd shared with Aloan. Lyra screamed as her shadow magic burned away, searing through her like acid. Eric released her, and she collapsed, smoking, barely conscious. Run, he said quietly, while you still can. Lyra dragged herself toward the stairs and vanished. The storm faded. Eric turned to where Bryn lay crumpled against the wall, the shadow bindings dissolving. He knelt beside her, his expression softening. Forgive me. I should have come sooner. Elias, Bryn croaked. He's safe. Across the room, Elias stared at Eric with wide, wandering eyes. You're the man from my dreams. Eric's jaw tightened. I am. Are you really my father? Eric looked at Bryn, a question in his gaze. She nodded weakly. Yes, Eric said, his voice breaking. I am. Elias took a tentative step forward. Then why did you leave me? The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Eric had no answer that could ever be enough. The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. Eric had no answer that could ever be enough. Before he could speak, a roar of fury echoed from the stairwell. Commander Thorn burst back into the chamber, his face bloodied, his sword blazing with enchanted fire. You think you can defy the queen and live? Eric rose, placing himself between Thorn and his son. I think you should have stayed down. They collided with the force of a thunderclap. Steel met in human strength. Thorn was skilled, perhaps the finest swordsman in Valor, but Eric was something beyond mortal skill. He moved like liquid shadow, each strike precise and devastating. The tower shook with the violence of their clash. But in the chaos, no one noticed Lyra rising. The sorceress dragged herself upright, her face twisted with pain and rage. Her eyes locked on Elias, who stood frozen, watching his father fight. If I cannot deliver you alive, Lyra hissed, then I'll take what matters most. She lunged forward, her hands glowing with sickly green light. Shadow tendrils wrapped around Elias before he could scream, lifting him off the ground. Your magic, little prince. I'll drain every drop. No. Bryn threw herself at Lyra, but the sorceress backhanded her aside. Lyra's spell began, a dark siphon pulling at the power within Elias's blood. The boy convulsed, his mouth open in a silent scream as magic tore from him in streams of golden light. Stop. Eric roared, abandoning his fight with Thorn. But he was too late. The siphon touched something deep within Elias, something ancient and protected. The magic recoiled, and a sound like breaking crystal filled the chamber. Then, everything stopped. Light erupted from Elias's chest. Not the wild, untrained flickers of a child's power, but something deliberate, ancient. A woman's voice, warm as summer and strong as steel, echoed through the ruins. Enough. Lyra stumbled backward, her spell shattering. What is this? The light coalesced, taking form, translucent and shimmering, but unmistakably human. A woman with silver eyes and flowing hair, her presence filling the chamber with the scent of wildflowers and rain. Eloan! Eloan! Eric breathed, his voice breaking. The ghostly form turned to him, and her expression was both tender and sad. My love, you should not have come here. I couldn't let them take him. I know. She looked at Elias, still suspended in Lyra's failing grip, and her image brightened. My beautiful boy, how you've grown. Thorn stepped back, his sword lowering. This is impossible. She's dead. My body is dead, Eloan said, her voice resonating with power. But I wove my essence into my son's blood. A mother's final protection. She turned to Lyra, and her gaze turned cold. You dare try to steal what is his? Lyra's hands trembled. The queen commanded. The queen murdered me. Eloan's words rang through the chamber like a bell. She poisoned me because she feared what my child would become. Because she knew the prophecy. What prophecy? Bryn whispered, pulling herself upright. Eloan's form drifted closer to Elias, her hand hovering near his face though she could not touch him. It was written in the oldest texts before the vampire courts and the Almerian wardens became enemies. When shadow and light merge in blood, the dying lands shall wake. A child born of both shall stand between the worlds, bridge or blade, savior or doom. She turned to face them all. My son is that child. His blood carries the magic of the Almerian line and the immortal strength of House Valor. He could heal the rift between our peoples, restore what has been broken for centuries. Or destroy everything, Thorn said hoarsely. The queen was right to fear him. The queen fears only the loss of her power, Eloan said. She cares nothing for the land, for the people, for the future. She would let the realm die rather than relinquish control. Eric's hands clenched into fists. I should have seen it, should have known she would. You loved her once, Eloan said gently. It blinds even the wisest. She looked at him with infinite sadness. But you must choose now, Eric. Your queen or your son, your crown or your heart. There is no choice, Eric said. There never was. Lyra, sensing her moment slipping away, gathered her remaining power for one final strike. If the boy lives, the realm falls. She thrust both hands toward Elias, channeling everything she had left, a spell meant to tear the magic from his body and his soul with it. But Elias was no longer defenseless. His eyes snapped open, glowing with silver and gold. Eloan's voice merged with his own. No more. Power exploded from him, wind, light, and shadow intertwined, a perfect fusion of everything he was. The force of it blew out the windows, cracked the stone walls, sent dust and debris swirling in a maelstrom. Lyra's spell turned back on itself, her own dark magic consuming her. She screamed as shadow tendrils she'd summoned wrapped around her, dragging her down into darkness of her own making. When the light faded, she was gone, not dead, but banished, cast into whatever void her magic had opened. Elias collapsed to the floor, gasping. Thorn staggered to his feet, bleeding from a dozen wounds, his sword broken. He looked at Eric, at the boy, at the fading image of Aloan, and something like fear crossed his face. "This isn't over," he rasped. "The queen will come. With armies. With everything she has. Let her come," Eric said coldly. "I'm done hiding." Thorn turned and fled, stumbling down the stairs, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Aloan's form was already fading, her power spent.
Eric, protect him.
"Raise him to be better than we were." "I will," Eric promised. "I swear it on your memory," she smiled, turning to Bryn. "And you, brave heart.
Thank you.
For loving him when I could not." Bryn's tears fell freely. "I would do it again, 1,000 times." "I know." Aloan's image flickered, dissolving into motes of golden light. "He chose well, Eric. She is everything I hoped she would be." And then she was gone. Silence filled the ruined tower. Elias sat up slowly, his small face streaked with tears. "Mama?" Bryn rushed to him, pulling him into her arms, holding him so tightly he squeaked. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Eric knelt beside them, his hand hovering uncertainly near Elias's shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Elias shook his head, then looked up at Eric with those impossibly old eyes.
She loved you.
"My mother. I could feel it. She loved you more," Eric said, his voice rough. "Everything she did was for you." "And now?" Elias asked. "What happens now?" Eric looked at Bryn, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the determination that still burned in her eyes. "Now we stop running. Now we face the queen." Bryn's arms tightened around Elias. "She'll kill him. She'll try," Eric said. "But she'll have to go through both of us first." He stood, offering Bryn his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "You saved his life," Eric said quietly. "You've given him everything I could not. For that, Bryn Marlowe, you have my eternal gratitude." "I didn't do it for gratitude," Bryn said. "I did it because he's mine. Because I love him." Eric nodded slowly. "Then we agreed. He is ours to protect." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The queen would know by now. Thorn would tell her everything. War was coming. War was coming. Eric stood at the edge of the ruined tower, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Valor Castle rising against the darkening sky. Behind him, Bryn tended to Elias, checking him for injuries, whispering reassurances. "How long before she moves against us?" Bryn asked. "She's already moving," Eric said. "Thorn will have reached her by now. She'll summon the legions, call in every debt, every alliance." He turned to face them. "We have perhaps 2 days before this kingdom tears itself apart. Then we run," Bryn said. "Take Elias somewhere far away, beyond her reach." "There is nowhere beyond her reach," Eric replied. "And I am done running." Elias looked up from where he sat, his small face serious. "Are we going to fight her?" Eric knelt before his son, meeting his eyes. "I am going to face her. You and Bryn will stay hidden until—"
No.
The word came from Bryn, firm and unyielding. "If you're going to face her, we go together. All of us. It's too dangerous." "Everything has been dangerous," Bryn interrupted. "But Elias is a prince. Your son. He has a right to stand before the court, to be seen for what he truly is." Eric studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Very well. But we do this my way. We enter the castle openly, publicly. Force her hand before she can move in shadows. And if she refuses to acknowledge him?" Eric's smile was cold. "Then let the kingdom choose which sovereign they'll follow." They traveled through the night, moving swiftly along roads that grew increasingly crowded as they approached the capital. Word had spread, whispers carried by fleeing villagers, by Thorn's wounded soldiers, by travelers who'd seen the storm that tore through Crestfall Woods. The vampire king has a son. The queen tried to murder him. The old magic has returned. By the time they reached the outer districts of Valor, crowds had gathered. Some shouted accusations. Others reached out, trying to touch Elias as though he were a holy relic. Eric kept them at bay with nothing more than his presence, a wall of ancient power that none dared cross. Bryn held Elias close, her heart pounding. She'd never seen so many vampires in one place. Pale faces with glowing eyes, beautiful and terrible, watching their every move. "They're staring," Elias whispered. "Let them," Eric said. "Let them see what their queen tried to destroy." Inside Valor Castle, the queen paced before her throne, her gown trailing across marble floors slick with centuries of blood and power. "He's coming here?" she demanded. Openly. Thorn, his arm in a sling, his face bruised, nodded grimly. "With the boy and the mortal woman, they'll reach the gates within the hour." The queen's fingers curled into claws. "Arrogant fool. He thinks he can challenge me in my own hall." "The people are restless, your majesty," Lord Bastian said carefully. "They've heard rumors of the prophecy, of Elmirian magic returning. Some are calling the boy a savior. He's an abomination." The queen's voice cracked like a whip. "A mongrel half-breed who threatens the purity of our bloodline." "Nevertheless," Bastian continued, "if you move against him publicly, you risk civil war. Half the nobility still remembers the Elmirian wardens. They may side with Eric. Then we'll kill them too." The queen turned to her captain of the guard. "Summon the legions. Every soldier, every blade. When Eric Valor crosses that threshold, he'll face an army." "And the boy?" Thorn asked. The queen's smile was venomous. "Bring him to me alive. I want him to watch his father die before I rip the magic from his veins." The great doors of Valor Castle stood open, not in welcome, but in challenge. Eric walked through them with Bryn and Elias at his side, his footsteps echoing through the entrance hall. Soldiers lined the walls, hundreds of them, armored and armed, their expressions cold. "Stay close," Eric murmured. They ascended the grand staircase, past tapestries depicting centuries of vampire rule, past statues of long-dead kings. The throne room doors loomed ahead, guarded by two massive warriors who stepped aside without a word. Inside, the entire court had gathered, nobles in elaborate finery, council members who'd sworn loyalty to Eric, now standing in the queen's shadow. And at the center, seated on a throne of blackened iron, the queen herself. She was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, sharp, cold, deadly. Her eyes locked on Elias, and her lip curled in disgust. "So," she said, her voice carrying through the hall, "the rumors are true. My husband returns, bearing his bastard like a prize." "He is no bastard," Eric said, his voice resonating with power. "He is my son, my heir, and I claim him before this court and all witnesses." Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. The queen rose from her throne, descending the steps with predatory grace. "You claim him? After you hid him away like a shameful secret? After you let his whore of a mother spread her legs and pollute our bloodline?" Bryn felt Elias tense beside her. She squeezed his hand, trying to anchor him. Eric's eyes blazed crimson. "Eloan Crestfall was worth 10 of you. She died because you poisoned her, because you feared what her son would become." "I feared nothing," the queen shrieked. "I protected the realm from contamination, from the prophecy that would see our kind enslaved to mortals and their pathetic magic." "The prophecy speaks of balance," Eric said, "of healing what has been broken. You fear it because it threatens your power, not the realm." The queen gestured sharply, and soldiers moved forward, surrounding Eric, Bryn, and Elias. "I am the law here. I am the power. And I say the boy dies tonight. Then you'll have to kill me first." The voice came from the back of the hall. Lord Bastian stepped forward, his ancient face grave. "I stand with Lord Eric. The boy deserves to be heard." Another noble joined him, then another. Within moments, half the court had moved to Eric's side of the hall, creating a physical divide. The queen's face contorted with rage. "Traitors, all of you. We are loyal to the realm," Bastian said. "Not to your paranoia." The queen drew a blade from her belt, slender, curved, glowing with dark enchantment. Then die with him. Tension crackled through the air like lightning about to strike. Bryn pulled Elias behind her, her heart hammering. This was it. The moment everything would either break or bend into something new. Eric stepped forward, placing himself between the queen and his son. I invoke the right of challenge. Single combat. The victor decides the boy's fate. The queen's smile was savage. Accepted. And when I tear your heart from your chest, I'll make the boy watch before I do the same to him. If you can, Eric said quietly. Outside, thunder rumbled. Inside, armies shifted, hands moving to weapons. And in the center of it all, a small boy with silver in his eyes and magic in his blood stood witness to the fate of kingdoms. And in the center of it all, a small boy with silver in his eyes and magic in his blood stood witness to the fate of kingdoms. The queen descended the final step, her enchanted blade humming with dark power. You've grown soft, Eric. Love has made you weak. Love has made me dangerous, Eric replied, because now I have something worth fighting for. They circled each other, the court holding its collective breath. Bryn pulled Elias back toward the wall, but the boy resisted, his eyes fixed on his father. Mama, I have to help him.
No, sweetheart.
Let him. The queen struck first. She moved with the speed of centuries, her blade a blur of poisoned steel. Eric dodged, countered, his own power erupting in waves of crimson lightning. They clashed again and again, each strike shaking the foundations of the castle. The queen was vicious, elegant, precise. But Eric fought with something she'd never possessed, purpose beyond power. You think you can defy me? The queen hissed, driving him back toward the throne. I built this court. I held this realm together while you wallowed in sentiment. You built nothing, Eric snarled. You only took. You only destroyed. Their blades locked, faces inches apart. And what would you build with your mongrel son? A kingdom that bows to mortal magic? A realm where our kind becomes servants to the very cattle we rule. I would build a future, Eric said. Something you've never understood. He threw her back with inhuman strength. She landed gracefully, already preparing her next attack, a spell that would age him, weaken him, make him vulnerable. Dark energy coalesced around her hands. Your future dies tonight. She released the curse. It shot toward Eric like a spear of shadow, and shattered against a shield of golden light. The court gasped. Elias stood with his hands outstretched, his small body trembling with effort, light pouring from him in waves. Don't hurt my father. The queen's eyes widened. Impossible. The boy is untrained. The boy, came a new voice, resonant and ancient, carrying the blood of the Almerian wardens. Eloan's ghostly form materialized beside Elias, her hand resting on his shoulder, though she could not truly touch him. And I am not finished protecting him. The nobles erupted in whispers. Some fell to their knees. Others drew weapons, uncertain who to point them at. The queen's face contorted with fury. You're dead. I killed you. My body died, Eloan said calmly. But magic endures. And my son is proof that your fear is meaningless. She turned to address the court, her voice filling the hall. Behold the future you were told to fear. A child who bridges two worlds. Who carries within him the power to heal what centuries of war have broken. Elias's light grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Patterns formed in the air around him, ancient symbols, the language of the Almerian wardens, flowing like living script. Lord Bastian stepped forward, his aged face filled with wonder. I remember these marks. From before the purge, before we declared magic our enemy. He turned to the other nobles. This boy is no abomination. He is what we should have become. He is dead, the queen shrieked. She raised her blade, ready to strike Elias down herself. Eric caught her wrist mid-swing. Enough. His voice was cold. Final. My son will not die from your fear. He twisted her arm, forcing her to drop the blade. It clattered across marble, its dark enchantments fading. The queen tried to summon more magic, but Eric's grip tightened, his power overwhelming hers. You have two choices, Eric said quietly. Abdicate and live in exile, or continue this madness and face execution for the murder of Lady Eloan Crestfall. The queen's eyes darted around the hall, seeking allies, but the tide had turned. Even her most loyal supporters hesitated, watching Elias's display of power with expressions ranging from fear to awe. "You'll regret this," she spat. "The realm will tear itself apart without me. Then we'll rebuild it," Eric said. "Better than it was." He released her, stepping back. The queen stood there, alone and trembling with rage, before gathering her tattered dignity and sweeping toward the doors. "Anyone who follows me will be rewarded," she called out. "Any who stay are traitors to everything we've built." A handful of nobles followed her, perhaps a dozen out of hundreds. The rest remained, their gazes turning to Eric, to Elias, waiting. Silence settled over the throne room like snow. Eric walked to where his son stood, Eloan's fading form still hovering protectively nearby. He knelt before Elias, taking his small hands in his own. "You were very brave," Eric said softly. "I was scared," Elias admitted. "So was I." Eric smiled, a real smile, perhaps the first in centuries. Being brave means doing what must be done even when you're frightened. He stood, lifting Elias into his arms, and turned to face the court. His voice rang out, clear and unwavering. "Before all witnesses, before the assembled nobility of Valar, I declare this child, Elias Valar, son of Lord Eric Valar and Lady Eloan Crestfall, to be my rightful heir, Prince of Valar, bearer of two bloodlines, bridge between shadow and light." The hall erupted. Some cheered, some protested, but none could deny what they'd seen. Eric raised a hand, and silence fell once more. "And I name as his guardian, protector, and honored member of this court, Bryn Marlowe, whose courage and love gave my son life when I could not." Bryn's breath caught. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "My lord, I'm just. You are the woman who defied a kingdom for a child who wasn't yours," Eric said. "You are his mother in every way that matters. And you will stand beside him for as long as he needs you." Tears streamed down Bryn's face as Eric gestured for her to join them. She moved forward on trembling legs, and when she reached them, Elias reached out, taking her hand. "Mama," he said simply. The word echoed through the hall. Lord Bastian stepped forward, followed by the other nobles who'd sided with Eric. One by one, they knelt, first the elders, then the younger generation, until the entire court bowed before the new prince. "Long live Prince Elias," Bastian proclaimed. "Long live the future. Long live the prince." The hall echoed. Outside the castle, word spread through the capital like wildfire. "The queen has fallen. The vampire king has declared his heir. Magic has returned to Valar." In taverns and markets, in noble houses and peasant hovels, people whispered of what this might mean. War? Peace? A new era? An ending? No one knew, but they all felt it. The shift, the change, the sense that the world had turned on its axis and would never turn back. That night, Eric stood on the balcony overlooking his kingdom, Elias asleep in his arms. Bryn joined him, her shawl wrapped against the cold. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Eric said. "There will be resistance. The queen has fled, but her supporters remain. Some will fight, others will scheme. And Elias will grow up knowing both sides of his heritage," Eric said. "I'll teach him what it means to be vampire. You'll teach him what it means to be human. And together, perhaps we'll teach him to be something more." Bryn looked out at the city, its lights flickering in the darkness. "Do you think it will work? Vampire and magic united." "I don't know," Eric admitted. "But for the first time in centuries, I have hope." Elias stirred, murmuring in his sleep. Eric adjusted his grip, and Bryn reached out to brush hair from the boy's forehead. "He's ours," she whispered. "However this ends, he's ours." "Yes," Eric agreed. "He is." And below them, the kingdom whispered of revolution, of prophecy, of a mortal woman who became guardian to a prince, and a vampire king who chose love over power. The age of shadow and light had begun.